Hey, Wire Monkeys, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Cabling. On this episode, we're going to talk about how to get past the recruiter. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, technicians, project managers, estimators, project managers, customers. We're connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and that bell button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to us on one of the audio podcast platforms, would you mind giving us a 5-star rating? And if we're not a 5-star rated show, email me and tell me what I need to do to make this a 5-star rated show. Those simple little steps helps us take on the algorithm so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of people in the ICT industry. Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do a live stream on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD, and you know that's me, questions about installation, design, certification, project management, estimation, even career path questions. But I can hear you now. But Chuck, I'm driving my truck at Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. I don't want to crash. Okay, I record them. And you can go back and watch them on whatever platform or YouTube or the webpage at your convenience when it's safe to do so. Also, while this show is free, and it will always remain free, 4 years running, it's still free. If you find value in this content and you would like to help support the show, you can do it through Patreon. You can go to our webpage and peruse our Amazon links. You can also send us donations or subscribe to us through the podcast platforms. You can do that by clicking on that little QR code right there. As I said in the beginning, right now is a time in our industry where there's a lot of people looking for jobs. They're looking to expand their horizons. They're looking to, move to new areas because they don't like living in the area they're living anymore. And you put out enough resumes, sooner or later, you got to deal with a recruiter. How do you get past the recruiter? Because the recruiter is the gateway to talk to the people inside the company. You gotta impress that recruiter. You don't impress them, guess where your resume's going? In the circular file. Look that one up, all you youngins. So I brought on a subject matter expert today to talk to us how to get past the recruiter. You might be wondering, well, how does he know how to get past the recruiter? He is a recruiter. He knows how to get past them. Welcome to the show, David Gittleman. How you doing, my friend?
Good, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me. This is
My pleasure.
awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you. And yeah, sometimes the recruiter is viewed as the bad guy, but think of it this way. We have leverage to dozens of different clients that we're dealing with currently and previously. So we have a lot of leverage that individual companies don't have. So yes, we like to be viewed as the bad guy, the gatekeeper, but a recruiter is different than an HR person, because an HR person is just counting resumes and looking at resumes and putting them away. But the recruiter, even though he can be the bad guy, he can also be
I
your
didn't even
best
think
friend.
about that till you said that. Because, I was thinking because whenever I've looked for jobs, the times I've gone through recruiters, the company that I was applying for ended up hiring me. But you're absolutely right. If I'm a technician or somebody looking to apply for a job with ABC company and you're the recruiter for ABC, but it's not quite the good fit, you're working with other clients where it might be a better fit. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, and it's over time. I might not think of you, Chuck, for 3 years, but a job comes in 3 years down the line, and I'm calling you up and saying, maybe we talk once a year or once every 6 months. I drop you a note, an IM on LinkedIn, and just say, hey, how's it going? How's everybody? How's the family? And you respond to that message. And you say, hey, Dave, everything's good. I have a friend that's looking for a job. You tell that you put me in touch with that person, that kind of thing. That's how you build your relationship with your recruiter
It's
long
all
term.
about networking. All about networking. So why don't you go ahead and take just a few seconds to tell the audience who you are and a little bit about your background.
My name's David Gittleman. I've owned the Woods Group. I'm coming up on my 30th year of recruiting. It's all I've actually ever done, Chuck, is recruit for people in the IT industry. My dad started the business in 1990, and he brought me on into the business in 95. As soon as I finished UMass, I went to school for hotel restaurant management and realized working nights and holidays and weekends was not was not for me. So I went to go work with him, gave it a try, and just loved it ever since. The ability to make a difference for people is really great. I mean, there are a lot of people that I got jobs for that are now my clients, that are looking for people and hire people from me, and it's it's a very tough industry, and it's become a lot more it just
Right.
transactional is the word that I guess I was looking for. Is it so it's not as much about the relationship as it used to be, but having my own firm and being able to do what I do, I still value the relationship above else with my candidate and telling them, hey, like, this might not be the right opportunity for you. So that's as important as anything, is building that
Oh,
trust over
absolutely.
time.
I worked for many companies over my 40 plus year career in the low voltage industry, and one of those companies was a very large cable contracting company. As a matter of fact, when I worked for them, they were the largest privately held communications company in the United States. And I worked for a division that did low voltage out of the DC area. And we had our own recruiter. That was all that guy did, was he went to job fairs and and then he filtered, the HR people would filter him, hey, here's what we're looking for. And the recruiter would go out and find that person. And I'm telling you right now, because as an estimator when I was in the office at that time, for that particular job, when I would see people, the technicians come in, they'd always gravitate right back to that recruiter and they talk to him for like 15, 20 minutes, like hey, like it was their old friend or something. So, there's a lot of relationship that's really going to be critical there, especially in your position, because you're representing multiple companies. But that's actually a great point. Let me ask you, probably the most common question I get, right? What are some of the most common mistakes that somebody makes that prevents them from getting past you, the recruiter?
I think in the cabling industry, the biggest thing is that the technicians are a little bit too casual in the way they speak to me on the phone. It's just, hey, bro, or hey, man, or you, as opposed to maintaining just a regular level of professionalism, not trying to be my buddy. It's what I tell my kids all the time, is like when you're talking to an adult, show respect in the conversation. It's the same thing here. In your initial conversation, once you get to know me, you can call me bro. Like, Chuck, you can call
I can
me
call you
bro
bro
after
now.
the call. We're bros. Like, it's fun. Like, in normal friend conversations, it's fine. But when you're setting the table, set the table properly. Try to speak in complete sentences. Be ready to explain what you've done
Mm-hmm.
in your job, what you do on a daily basis. A lot of cabling guys say, I did this and I cabled that, and they just don't give enough detail. There's too many one-word answers or three-word answers, and it's really a dig. Sometimes even for the really good
Yep.
technicians, Chuck, it's hard. You really have to dig. On the PM side, you gotta bring same thing. The clients that I deal with are high profile, deal with Fortune 500 companies. They're looking for a certain level of polish. So on the PM side, same thing. Sometimes they act like they're if you're an IT cabling guy, you're a
Right.
professional. You're not a construction guy, okay? Like, you're a professional, and you should be able to bring your trade to your skill set to anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a Fortune 100, Fortune 50, or or not. So I think that those are some of the biggest things that I see. I see with that. The RCDDs tend to give good level of detail, and they take their
Right.
time. Good interviewers just take their time. Make sure you understand the question before you answer the question.
And it's not a bad thing. Or you tell me if I'm wrong. If you ask me a question during an interview, if I don't thoroughly understand that question, it's okay for me to ask you, can you say that? What was that question again? Or can you restate that question?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is oh, Chuck, you got that question wrong in the interview, and you come back and you say, I didn't get that question wrong in the interview. What are you
Mm-hmm.
talking about? And 9 times out of 10, it's the communication between the two parties.
I didn't learn this lesson until late in my career, probably entering my third decade in this career. I learned that preparation is key, right? And so it's okay. I know this is going to probably sound stupid to some people, but if you know that you're going to do a job interview and you haven't been doing job interviews for, you know, 10 years, 5 years, whatever, get your wife or your spouse or your brother or your sister, sit down to act like an HR person to ask you questions. Think about your think about your responses ahead of time, right? Think about what you're going to say.
Great
Not
point, Chuck.
necessarily memorize what you're going to say, but think about bullet points, and then that way, when because there's a lot of common questions that get asked by recruiters and HR, and you can prep for those, and that's just going to make you come off a lot better.
And that is 100% the right way, is to interview with someone who doesn't understand what you do. And I'm talking to the technicians right now. So talk to people that don't know what you do on a day in and day out basis, and explain it to them in a certain level of detail. And you can ask the person you're interviewing with, let me know if I'm giving the right level of detail. Like, is that
Right.
what you ask and answer the question, and then say, was that the right level of detail of what you were looking for? But you don't want to run on forever, and it becomes a
Right.
monologue.
Because especially when you get, not necessarily to you, but to the HR people, you know, a lot of HR people don't know that they're well versed in human resource management, but they're not well versed in copper and fiber cable installation certification and documentation. So you might, when you're sitting there saying, okay, well, we pulled in OS1 fiber and then we did tier one testing, and then the customer acts come back and do tier two testing for real, for spool testing and blah blah blah. That might be too much detail, right? Unless that HR
Right.
person is extremely versant in that, but that happens quite a bit.
But that's not even really their job, right? It doesn't make them a good or versus a bad HR person, even if they don't understand what you're talking about. That's not what they're tasked with doing. What they're tasked with doing is, does this person, how does he respond to questions? Does he hear the question properly? Because that's how he's going to deal with our user base. So that's how he's going to deal with the the maintenance guy, or the C level. That's those are the keys. Is to be
Yes.
patient and not just try and get done with the answer. Hey, I'm great. I can do. You know what you hear a lot of technicians do? I can do everything,
Yeah, right.
and that
Yeah,
is
I,
and that is the kiss of
I've
death
said
right there.
I've said many times on my podcast, I am a 40-year veteran of this industry. I am an RCDD, a Bixie technician, a former Bixie certified trainer. I've sat in tons and tons of manufacturer certification programs. I don't know everything. The
Yep.
more you learn, the more you realize you don't learn. So if someone comes to me and says they know everything, that's like someone saying, "Oh, I'm an expert." Cuckoo, cuckoo. No, you're not. That just tells me you're blatantly oblivious to what you don't know. It happens, right?
You become an expert when you know you don't know
Yes,
a lot of things. That's
I,
what
I
gets
run
you
in a
there.
lot of circles, and I do a lot of events, speaking events like that. And I've got a lot of people who follow me in my social media stuff. And when they meet me in person, they say, "Oh man, you're an expert, man. You know everything." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 easy with that E word," because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So.
And if you think you're an expert, then you think that nobody can tell you anything
Oh,
and that
great
you're
point.
perfect.
Great point. Because
You
if you
know?
think you're an expert, you're not willing to listen to, alternate ways. Because I can go, it turns into an hour show on how people argue over stuff all the time. But just because that's the way your granddad did it, your dad did it, because he used to be in communications, doesn't mean that's the way that we're still doing it today. And if you think you're an expert, you're not going to be willing to listen to the new methods, the new procedures, the new standards, the new best practices to help for the latest and greatest cabling we're installing. So that's actually a great point. Now, you and I met on LinkedIn. You'd sent me a friend request, and then you shot me a message, asked me about some RCD stuff. Let me ask you this, because I get this is one of my pet peeves. My brother, he's also in communications. He's a field supervisor. He's working for a very successful company. And I said to him one day, I said, "Are you on LinkedIn?" He's like, "Why would I be on LinkedIn?" I'm like, "What? You should be on LinkedIn." Let me ask you this. How important is it for a technician not only to be on LinkedIn, but to have a well maintained LinkedIn profile?
I think it's very important, Chuck. I really do. I think that recruiters and HR people, that's where they're going to look for it. And if you have a decent picture of on your profile, it's going to make a big difference. Don't have sunglasses on in your picture. You don't need to be wearing a hard hat either. Like I see guys with hard hats on. It's kind of cool. Like I get it. All right, I get it, you guys, but you don't need it. Just have a regular picture wearing your Bixie shirt or wearing a collared shirt. Like that's great. You know what I mean? Just a normal picture of you. Don't put your wife or your
Well,
dog in your
I love those.
picture. Like, we
I
don't
love
want
those where
any of
someone
that.
takes a picture of like him and his wife or her and her husband. They're obviously like at a wedding or something. And then their profile picture, they
Yeah,
zoom
they
in on
take it
just them.
out.
But you could tell they're in like a tux, and there's welcome back or congratulations behind them. Hold on. I gotta write this
Yeah.
note down before I forget. Mental note: talk to brother to update his profile picture to remove the hard hat. And that's actually my fault because I told him to put that picture up. So that's my fault, and because the other picture he sent me was like one of the ones I just explained. It was. You don't have to go out and spend a couple $100 on a professional headshot. I mean, literally, just you can go outside of a building like a brick wall or building or something, stand 10 feet off that brick wall so the camera focuses on you, and the brick wall becomes like bokeh kind of. Take that picture, make that your profile picture. And there's with Canva and AI, there's actually an AI program. You can send them a picture and it will turn it into, I don't know how many, but it turns them into professional headshots for you for your social media,
Wow.
right?
Yeah, that's great. And also, it's really important to at least have a little bit on the companies that you've worked for, even if it's just a few sentences for each, just so that you get picked up. The keywords get picked up by. So as a recruiter, if I do a search on Riser or I mean, like, these are searches that I was doing today, Chuck. Bixie. I did a search on Bixie today in New York. Like, this is real stuff.
Yep.
EIA, TIA. Like, I'm not that technical, but I am trying to figure out what the good
Right.
keywords that I can use are.
Here's a tip for you, David. EIA is an old acronym that's not really used anymore in our industry. So just to kind of get a real quick lesson, it used to be the EIA TIA
Yeah.
standards, but the TIA kind of absorbed EIA, so now it's the TIA ANSI standard. So if someone says EIA to me, what that tells me is, man, they've been around this industry for a while because we haven't used that term in a while. So
But sometimes that's good because I'm looking at resumes I have a whole set of resumes that I'm searching that are before 2008. So some of those got RCDDs are retired, but a
Right.
bunch of them aren't.
Hey there, business owners and tech enthusiasts. Are you tired of dealing with outdated technology and unreliable IT support? Introducing Better Days Technology, Rhode Island's premier IT solution provider. Whether you need secure network setups, top-notch cybersecurity, or seamless software integrations, Better Days Technology has got you covered. Don't let tech troubles hold you back. Visit betterdaystechnology.com or call 401-440-5483 today. One call to us and you'll be having better days. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
Let me ask you this question. This is not on our prearranged question, but I'm pretty sure you can answer this. Let's say that you have somebody who's been working for a company, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever. They're not actively looking. Should they keep their resume up to date, even though they're not actively looking?
100%. They should absolutely keep their resume up to date because you want it to be ready for when that opportunity does come around, and you don't want to be scrambling. I mean, that's the basic thing is sometimes you have to have your resume for your own company if you're going to be as part of a proposal. So to have something just ready, and you know what, you could be dropping your kid off at school next week, and your boss asks you for your resume to put into an RFP, and you have nothing. So you're pulling your job spec, from when you got the job. So I think it's really important, and it just is like there's a reality to it where we live in a world where there isn't that much loyalty between companies, and people.
40 years ago, I got into this industry because of my father-in-law. He worked for AT&T. And at the time when I got into the industry, he'd worked for AT&T for 30 years out of the same garage, right? And that's just not what you
Yep.
find today. I mean, today's environment, you'll see people. I don't know what the average is. Maybe you might know what it is, but when you look at a resume now, people tend to stay around 5 years. It seems like to me that seems like to be the magic number to me for some reason. Um, Let me ask you this question: as a recruiter, does that if you if you get a resume that where somebody's only had, let's say they both have 20-year careers, and let's say one of them had only 2 jobs and the other had 7 jobs, does that make you look at one resume over another resume differently?
Depends. So sometimes so if you have 7 jobs over a 20 year career, it's an average of
Right.
3 years. If there's good progression in those jobs, then that might make them a better candidate than someone who's been at the same company for 20 years. So the famous word that clients use is they become institutionalized, which means they become part of. They start talking like they're in their own company's
Right.
cult, basically. I mean, the most famous ones are AT and
Right.
T and Verizon. It's so hard for these guys to get out of AT and T and Verizon and to get, without them going back and forth between the two of them. And we all know these people out there, and it's hard to break out from these companies. So there is good reason for you to at least look for a job and look to change where you are. I mean, interesting coming from me, who's been at the same
Right.
company for 30 years. But there
Yeah, but
are a lot of
that's your
reasons for you
company though,
to.
right? So well, there you
Yeah,
go.
it's different,
But that, you,
but still, it's good. It's a good way to increase and show progression in your career by getting different experiences and meeting different types of
gotcha.
people and dealing within
Yeah.
different
So
industries.
the way that I because I've what I like to do is I like to take what I just heard and just kind of like rearrange it in my brain so it makes sense to me. And so if I was based on what you just said, if I was a recruiter and I looked at that 20-year history and they had those 7 jobs and one was a dishwasher, one was a cable puller, one was working at an auto dealer, that doesn't really, that's just kind of, that doesn't, like you said, doesn't show that progression. But if I see, okay, one job they started off as an apprentice, the next job they were a technician, next job they were a lead tech or supervisor, next job they were a project manager, that's what you're kind of talking about, correct? And
Yeah.
it's funny. I never thought about that because I always would have thought that the person had, the two jobs would had the one up. But until what you said, because you rang the bell in my head because I work again going back to that largest privately held communications company I worked for. We were bringing in I was a project manager. We're bringing all of our supervisors to do their yearly review, and one of the supervisors, great guy. I mean, he'd be an asset to any company he worked for. And we were talking to him about, well, where do you see yourself 5 years from today, or 10 years from today? He goes, I like this job. He goes, you don't want to become a project manager or an estimate? Because no, I like what I'm doing right now. I don't want to change it. I was like, I didn't think about that. You just said that. Like, that's what you were just talking about. He'd been a project foreman for so long that he was comfortable with what he did, and he's working inside of his comfort box, and he didn't want to change that.
And that can be fine for certain jobs, right? But what you want to show is that you want to find that middle ground between I want to sit in your seat, Chuck. Like you don't want to be that aggressive, but you want to show that you have
Why
some
not?
drive.
Why not be that aggressive? I've actually told a boss that once.
Well, some people would think that that's the most brilliant.
I told a boss that
answer.
once when during one of my year-end reviews, and he says, "Well, where do you want to be next year?" I said, "In your chair."
Yeah. So, but but that's always depending on the situation.
True.
But mostly that's not the right answer, because you don't want to view the person as, you don't want to become viewed
Right.
as a threat, to your manager, or this person's going to get really bored in this job in about 2 weeks. So you have to find that middle ground between the two, and it's not easy. It's more of an art.
Yeah, I'm always on the path of self-improvement on everything that I do. And I always look at, that's why, when people, my day job, I'm an instructor. So I get a lot of feedback through survey mechanisms and stuff like that. And I get a lot of, man, you're the best instructor, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I kind of let those kind of go over my head. I try not to dive into those. I always look for the on the survey where somebody says, maybe you should talk about this more. Maybe, man, I noticed you had a lot of filler words, right? Those are the ones I always focus in on, because it makes me better.
Right. Or you focus on the ones that give a little bit more detail about the things that they like you, as opposed to just throwing platitudes at you. They said, well, one thing that really, really struck me about what you were saying was X. So that would be the other thing that you would pay attention to. Someone who took a moment and didn't just touch the surface, but wrote a little bit of a detail of what it was that you said. And that's exactly the same thing in an interview.
Hold that thought. Let's listen to a short message from our sponsor. Don't go anywhere. Bessemer Industries is your trusted partner in cutting-edge telecommunications and security solutions in Central California. From structured cabling and fiber optics to comprehensive telecom and surveillance systems, we've got you covered. Enhance your business with seamless connectivity and top-notch security. Our licensed and insured team ensures that you get the best service tailored to your needs. Why choose Bessemer Industries? Expertly crafted solutions, reliable and secure installations, licensed and insured professionals. Don't wait. Connect with us today and elevate your business to new heights. Bessemer Industries, connecting and securing Central California's businesses one wire at a time. Visit us at www.bessemerindustries.com or call 559-314-7050. Bessemer Industries, your link to seamless connectivity. Now, let's get back to the show.
So we were talking about resumes, and one of the most common pieces of advice I give people about resumes who are currently in the job market: don't just have one resume, right? So, for example, I'm not looking for a job, but if I were to look for a job, there's lots of things. I could go project management, I can go estimating, I can go training, right? I can go QA. I think, to me, it's always been great advice to think about the one or two, maybe three positions you want, and then tailor maybe a couple of your resumes to those positions, because you don't want a resume that's focused on estimating when you're applying to something that's maybe for QA, right? So, what are some tips that candidates can effectively do to tailor their resumes to stand out for, like, say, low voltage?
I would I would say that if you're a technician, you probably only need one version of your resume. I think if you're unless, well, you could have a resume that you put out to the general public, let's say on LinkedIn. If you're a technician and you really want to become a project manager and you're applying for project manager jobs and technician jobs, then you have more of the aspirational resume where it's like I've taken a couple classes on LinkedIn about PMP certification, so I would say that would be a good way to go, is to have more an aspirational resume and then a regular standard technician resume, because once again you don't want to, oh, this guy wants to be a project manager, he doesn't want to be a technician. Well, that's, maybe you would be much happier technician somewhere else at a different company, and then you
Right.
can work your way into being a project manager. So an HR person will hear that and they'll be like, oh my God, this person wants to become a project manager and he doesn't want to work with us. But meanwhile, you're working at a small, dinky cabling company, and that wasn't an
Right.
issue at all. You know what I mean? Like, you'd be happy to go work for this
Right.
company as a technician, and then and because you're really good at what you do, 1 year from now you will be a project manager. And I
Yeah,
see it
especially when you
all the
throw
time.
another layer of complexity over this, right? Project managers. So, a small company that might only have 5 or 10 technicians, you might be given the title project manager, but you're really just acting like a lead tech or project foreman. Then when you go to work for a big company, that's got multiple branches and 50 people in each of those branches, to them, a project manager is the true definition of a project manager. They're managing schedules, they're managing timelines, they're managing materials and labor, and they're reporting. That's what a true project manager does. Sometimes the smaller companies will give a person the title project manager so they can do multiple stuff, right? So especially when you throw that extra layer of complexity on that, I could see how that could really confuse an HR person trying to evaluate, trying to get somebody to come on as a project manager within their organization, especially if that person's coming from a smaller, where they're thinking, I'm a project manager, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and then the HR person's like, well, you say you're a project manager, but you don't list Excel or Word as any of your skill sets, and you never said you never heard of, AutoCAD or stuff like that, where those are things that a good project manager. Man, we could go really deep.
But the same thing in reverse can be true, interestingly enough, as well. Whereas the guy that works for the small cabling company has to wear so many different
Yes,
hats that he is doing project
could
scheduling.
be,
And going to a big company, you become tunnel vision, and you only get to do one
could
piece
be
of it.
absolutely.
So some of the best guys that I found in ICT are out of tiny
Yes.
companies, and the guy was just working his ass off doing a little
Yeah, I
bit of
find the
everything.
biggest frustration with anybody coming from a smaller company to a larger company is they get frustrated because larger companies move slower. A small company, you got to be nimble and quick. And as a project manager, you can turn on a dime and do, maybe send the guys to a different project or do something different. With a larger company, there's it's like the Titanic. It doesn't stop on a dime. It doesn't go around icebergs. It goes, well, it doesn't go through them, evidently.
Yep.
That's why we have a Titanic on the bottom of the ocean. But yeah,
Well, at least we still have some
yeah, yeah.
icebergs
So
to
so
talk
yeah, going
about.
from a small company where you're used to making your own decisions on shooting from the hip and being able to make stuff. If you get great satisfaction at, and I'm not saying all big companies are like what I just described, but there are a lot of them that can be frustrating.
Yep,
Absolutely, can be frustrating.
100%. But showing, if you're out of that small cabling company, those are the guys and the ones that want to make it into a big company, those are the guys that end up doing so well. So it's worth noting that, like, sometimes it takes a little bit for you to get used to it, but once you do and you understand it and the reasons that things move slower,
Yeah,
it's
a lot
worth
of
it.
people like going to bigger companies because it's more money. But money's not the only motivator for somebody looking for a new job. Some people thoroughly enjoy being a big fish in a small pond. They don't want to be a small fish in a
Yep.
big pond.
It's true. It's
Yep.
definitely true. So so that guy might just stay at the same company for the
Yep.
next 20, 25 years. And there's a market for that. If you have to move, yeah, there's still a
And if they're
market
happy with
for
that,
it.
yeah, fine and
It's
dandy.
not as
Exactly right. Small companies, what happens is if the owner dies, they tend to fold up and go away. That's one of the bad things about small companies. But also big companies go broke too. I've seen that too.
or they get acquired and they
Oh
just
yeah.
shut down the
Oh
ICT
yeah.
division, right? I mean
There's
that
positives and
happens.
negatives to both working for small and
Yeah,
large companies.
yeah.
Now you and I met because you shot me a message because you were looking for any if I knew any RCDs looking for jobs. So how valuable do you think having a credential like a Bixie technician or an RCD? How valuable is that when you're assessing the candidate? And to follow that up, do those certifications significantly increase the candidate's chance of getting an interview?
100%. If you have an RCDD, especially here in the New York tri-state area, you're gold right now. Young guys, the trades are looking for people in New York. Hard to find good young guys. So if you're out in Kentucky or wherever you are in the U.S. and you're a young guy as an RCDD and you want to move to the New York, New Jersey area, like there are jobs available. Here there are good jobs. There's so much new building going on in New York City. Sure, we're not doing as much cabling to the desk anymore, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of cabling going on. It's just higher level stuff. So I would say yes, having your RCDD is a huge plus, but under the minimum in ICT is understand the first thing that clients say to me is as long as they understand the Bixie rules, the Bixie guidelines, then I can work with that. So having some exposure to some of the training that Bixie offers is a huge leg up because otherwise you're not getting your foot in the door at all. If you don't know Bixie standards, forget about it in the world that I
Oh,
live in.
absolutely, absolutely. So let's focus on like say technicians for right now, just for a brief second. If they're on LinkedIn or if they're on or submitting resumes, how can that candidate demonstrate their hands-on abilities through their resume or LinkedIn profile?
I think it's just writing down specifically what they did, the type of equipment that they've worked on, utilizing the words hands-on with X equipment is going to be a huge leg up. I mean, one of the searches that I'll do is, like I said before, is Bixie. So just having just mentioning the word Bixie as many times as you can in the profile without it being obnoxious, obviously,
without
is
being without
is
being
a good
accused of
thing.
being the Bixie police.
Exactly.
Somebody accused me of that once.
And that's another point is sometimes I'll do only a search on Bixie under training, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily all show up in the same place on LinkedIn. So the algorithms are constantly being tweaked on LinkedIn. So it's good for you to mention it at least at some point, utilizing Bixie standards. You know, I cabled a, 300,000 square foot
Hmm.
data center. So that's, that kind of thing.
Still,
So yes, it's putting in specifically and giving some level of scope. What was it for? You don't have to name the
right.
client that you did it for. Usually you definitely don't need to do it, but give some level of scope to it. Like where did you do it? Was it a greenfield or was it an already existing space? And that everybody can understand. It doesn't matter if you're HR or not. And by giving that person that level of detail, it allows them into the conversation. And that's what you want, is you want it. And that's why it's so important, like what we were talking before, about explaining it to your brother or your cousin or somebody who doesn't really understand what it is you're doing on a day in, day out basis, because that's what you're going to be encountering when you talk to that
because you
HR
might run
person.
into legal problems if you start naming customers, especially if you signed like an NDA. But you can certainly say, "Hey, I've
100%.
I've done 5 data center projects, X amount of in an average square footage of blah blah blah, and this is the type of cabling." That way, it's broad, it's generic, it's not specific to the actual customer that they did the work for. So let's talk about again looking at the technicians. Let's look at because part of my audience are people who are new to the industry or maybe wanting to get into the industry. So, what advice would you give that candidate who may not necessarily have a lot of experience, but they want to they're eager to get into this industry? How can they make a compelling case to you to get past you to get hired?
I would say go to a crew force and be willing to do whatever it takes. Those guys that go into the tech systems crew force and become part of a crew, and it's not, I get that it might not be what you want to do for a long time, but if you can get a little bit of actual hands-on experience, because some kids go to the trade schools, but they never get to work with
Right.
the gear. So they can't explain it in a way that actually makes sense. So they have the training, but they're like, but then you're looking at their resume and that's like, well, what experience? You worked at
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks, like you gotta get your hands
Right.
on the equipment. Yeah, I mean, there's a training school here and it's great, for them to get the training, but you have to get whatever job you can get at a school part-time, anything to show initiative, volunteer, I mean, whatever it is, whatever it takes, just to get your hands on that equipment, because everybody's going to say, "Oh, it's so hard to get a job in IT." Yeah, it is hard to get a job in IT, but once you get the hardest job to get in IT is your first job. Once you get your first solid inroad IT job, then it
Yeah, because
becomes
there's
easier.
book smart and there's street smart, right? You can have that book memorized forwards and backwards, but sometimes when you get out in the field, there's some variations that happens in the field that the book doesn't really discuss. The book can't really cover every single scenario for every type of environment, for every type of customer, for every type of cable plant that's out there in the world. So it's kind of generic. So putting your hands on fills in that
It's
gap.
your ability to pivot and show that you can work in a corporate environment and with specific guidelines and know how to deal with people. So even though it's a technical, we're technically focused, in our careers, you have to be able to bring that back out. So,
So
so
let me
yeah.
ask you this: in the terms of job readiness and overall appealing to, say, the hiring manager, um, you have two applicants, not clients, two applicants, and you push them both through. One of them has credentials like Bixie Tech, RCDD, FOE, CFOT, and the other one doesn't. How's that? How do those two compare to the hiring manager? Which one do you think is most likely going to get hired if everything else is
Well, I
equal?
mean, the person with the certifications, and they're going to get paid a lot more too. Like, yeah, there was a guy that I spoke to today that had his PMP, his RCDD, and his CCNA. It shows so much diversity in skill set, because cabling guys shouldn't just be
Right.
cabling guys. They should understand how a router works. They should not just showing some
Right.
interest in that is helpful too. I mean, that's another good one. Getting training. Sure, you could be a good cable tech. Maybe one of the things you could do is do a CompTIA, and get a
So
network
you're already
certification.
leading down. I have an additional question here. So we talked about the Bixie Tech, the Bixie RCDD and stuff. What other certifications do you see customers desiring from their applicants?
Oh yeah, I mean, PMP, CCNA, Prince, ITIL. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that they're all, those are all really valid. My my cabling tends to be more IT focused because I come from more of an IT background and recruit. So this is kind of like an offshoot from my technology side. So I would say, but I
So
see
let
a
me ask you
lot
this
of
question
that.
then: Do you ever see, or have you ever seen customers putting in when they put in their request to you to find this person, because this is a lesser known certification. The FOA, Fiber Optic Association, they have their CFOT, which is Certified Fiber Optic Technician, and they got a couple others too. Do you ever see those kinds of certifications?
I haven't. I haven't seen the requirement for that.
That's good fodder for people to think about there. Don't get me wrong. The FOA has a really good certification program, but it's not exactly the same as the Bixby program. The Bixby program is more well known. So, Dave, what a fantastic conversation, my friend. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. This was great. I appreciate you having me on.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.